Hello, this video is intended to help you with your revision of events in Germany between 1890 and 1918. In order to fully understand this properly, we need to start by having an idea of where Germany is by 1890. And so we're going to talk very briefly about Otto von Bismarck in particular, their Chancellor up until 1890. We'll see a change take place at that time, the very start of our period, because the accession of Kaiser Wilhelm II to the throne in 1888 sees a clock put on Bismarck, and Wilhelm II dismiss him in 1890 and start to take Germany in a very different direction. We'll then finish by taking a look at some of the challenges facing Kaiser Wilhelm in the years after 1890, and in particular we'll focus on industrialization, the rise of the working classes, the emergence of democracy in Germany, and the role that the Prussian army would play in guiding policy in the country at that time. So, to understand the position that Germany was in 1890, we need to understand a little bit about where Germany was coming from, and that means knowing who Otto von Bismarck was. Otto von Bismarck had been the Chancellor in Germany for almost 2 decades by this point, and he had been responsible for revolutionising the role of Germany overall. He had unified the different states, Prussia, Saxony, Bavaria, Bohemia, etc. He had unified all of these states into one country and had made it clear that they were to work together now. They had shared laws, they had a shared currency, they had a shared postal system. All of the features that were needed to establish itself as one country rather than separate states. However, all of this said, in 1888 we see a massive change, because at that point we see Kaiser Wilhelm II come to the throne. Now, Kaiser Wilhelm is a young man. He is only 29 years of age when he comes to the throne, and despite having a very experienced statesman like Bismarck already running the country for him, Kaiser Wilhelm is keen to transform Germany in his own view. He wants to take it in his own direction. And that means 2 years after Kaiser Wilhelm comes to the throne, at the very start of our period in 1890, Bismarck is dismissed and we see really the Kaiser's Germany starting to take shape. So, our 29-year-old Kaiser Wilhelm II is keen to transform the face of Germany. He is ambitious. He wants to make Germany into one of the dominant European powers overall. And as such, there is a clear focus on building up industry with Germany so as to make it economically more powerful. Now, this does have some success. By 1914, Germany is producing already twice as much steel as Britain. At the same time, they are also producing 1/3 of the world's electrical goods, and they also have an international quality chemical industry. But all of these advances in industrialization do also have another knock-on effect, and that is to develop and build all of these goods, you need people. And as a consequence, we start to see the face of Germany transforming. One of the most noticeable changes during this period is the amount of people moving from the countryside to live in the towns and cities. By 1910, 60% of Germans lived in towns and cities. And a more noticeable impact is the fact that the amount of towns with 100,000 people living in them skyrockets from only 8 in 1871 to 48 by 1910. Now, this brings with it another problem, another challenge for Germany, because having all of these people living in towns and cities means you simply don't have the workforce that you once had in the countryside, the people who were needed to produce food. And as a consequence, by 1914, by the outbreak of World War I, Germany simply cannot produce enough food on its own to feed all of its own people. And therefore, by World War One, it is having to ship in from abroad 1/5 of its food in order to feed its people. And this, as we will see, will bring challenges of its own during the war itself. But this demand from Kaiser Wilhelm II for an increase in industrial output brings with it another change that nobody could really have predicted in Germany at the time. We start to see now more and more workers living in the cities. As we've already said, the amount of towns that had 100,000 people in them skyrockets to 48 before World War One. And these large numbers of workers living and working together in Germany start to recognise that they have a voice. Some of the conditions that they find themselves experiencing, both at work and at home, they start to realise that they're unhappy with them, and they want to push for changes there. And these workers overall recognise that they have a voice, they can have an influence on the country. The country needs them. Kaiser Wilhelm II wants them to be working in the factories. Well, if they use the power of strike action to put pressure on the government, they may be able to bring in a change. And therefore we start to see at this time this rise of this idea of socialism in Germany, something which hadn't been present previously when the majority of people had lived in the countryside. Now they're in the factories, they have more of a voice. In order to combat this, because this poses a threat to Kaiser Wilhelm II's plans, his governments do try to appease the workers. Changes are brought in, which seemingly offer workers a better solution. For example, we see in Germany old age pensions being paid some 20 years before they were paid in England. We see sickness benefits and accident insurance being offered to the workers. But these are always responses to the problems the workers experience, rather than offering long-term solutions overall. And this issue of socialism and the working class voice is something that will not go away during the Kaiser's reign. Indeed, by 1914, the biggest party in his Reichstag are the Social Democrats, and their growth represents the power that the working classes increasingly have throughout the period 1890 to 1918. Indeed, it is not just problems from the working classes that the Kaiser has to be aware of. The Kaiser had always previously ruled with a Reichstag, but had been able to largely ignore or act without having to worry too much about it. However, during this period between 1890 and 1918, there is a massive change in the power that the people have. This is not limited only to the left-wing workers, but also to the middle classes as well, who feel that they want greater representation in the Reichstag and they want their voices to be heard. Now, the Kaiser can still count on some support, in particular the more right-wing conservative elements within the Reichstag will support the Kaiser and form coalition governments in order to get his laws through. But all of this does come at a cost for the Kaiser. It isn't straightforward. He cannot just act without consulting the Reichstag, and this causes him more concerns and frustrations throughout his reign. And these changes within the democratic system, or this emerging democratic system in Germany, represent that final challenge that Germany faces in these years. And that comes principally from a third group who want to have their say in terms of the Kaiser's policy going forward. Not only are there the industrialists, not only are there the landowners or the Junkers who've previously vied to exert their influence over the Kaiser, but there is also the Prussian army. Now, Germany has a proud military tradition. It had the world's most professional army. It had been successful on the battlefield, most notably recently in the Franco-Prussian War. The German people are proud of their army. And yet here is the irony. It is the army that helps to make this yet more undemocratic at this time, because the Kaiser is prepared to listen to the army rather than to the Reichstag. Now, this fits with what we know. Kaiser Wilhelm II is a young man. He is ambitious when he comes to the throne, and one of his main ambitions is the desire to eclipse Britain, to be greater than Britain. The army can clearly help him do this by acquiring an empire abroad, and this would underline the Kaiser's foreign policy of Weltpolitik, this idea of obtaining a place in the sun, an empire abroad that would allow an increase in German trading and a massive boost to the German economy. In order to achieve this policy, naval laws were passed. These were populist laws. People wanted and supported these laws because it saw Germany build an even greater fleet, a fleet of battleships that could compete with Britain on the high seas. And people were eager for this. They were proud to hear these stories of what was happening with the creation of their navy. So it's hugely popular, but it also proves to be Germany's undoing, because whilst this money is being spent on increasing the size of Germany's army and its navy, money is not being spent to support and improve the lives of the workers in the cities. And all of these problems will come home to Germany during the Great War and make life in Germany particularly difficult.